This video is to help you with Task 3 for the Social Studies Middle Childhood Handbook. Just to go over the basics, you want to make sure that you read all of the pages that are related to Task 3 in your handbook. This includes the specification chart that's towards the end of your handbook, because this will tell you how to name your files and how many you need, and there are a number of files for this task. You also want to make sure that you print and look at the exemplars that are provided as a model in your Blackboard course that are for your handbook, because that will be really helpful to determine the depth that EdTPA is looking for and some examples of what it should look like. For Task 3, you're going to have 4 parts. The first is going to be student work samples. So this is literally a copy of the work that your students have done. Part B is going to be evidence of your feedback to them. And again, we'll go over this more, but this can be a video or it can be a written document. Part C is going to be your assessment commentary. This is where you're actually going to write your explanation for all of your assessment. And then Part D is going to be your evaluation criteria. So this is the checklist or rubric that you used for your assessment. And there are 5 rubrics for this task. So you want to make sure you check your handbook and look for a level 3 there to make sure that you're at least passing. If you can aim for a level 4, that's even better. To get started on Task 3, the first thing that you want to do right away is you want to make sure that you go back and find one assessment from one of your lessons, one of the formal assessments from your lessons that you're going to use to evaluate how well your students learned these ideas and what the future steps are going to be. So it should be an assessment that the whole class did. Now, if you're only working with a small group, that's fine, then that counts as your whole class. Remember that it has to be, I believe, 3 or 4 students for all the handbooks. So you want to make sure that the whole class has done this assessment. If you are in a class where you do a lot of group work, that's fine. Your assessment can be done by a group, but you have to grade each student individually. So you have to make sure that you have each student turn in work that is exclusively theirs, not just the groups. And the assessment needs to provide students with all of the things that you need in your central focus. So you want to make sure that you look back at what those things are that are specific to your handbook, and students need to be showing in their assessment how well they've mastered those things. And it should be a formal assessment that has an evaluation tool. So you want to make sure that the evaluation tool that you're using matches your assessment and that you've given feedback and graded this according to your evaluation tool. So according to your rubric or checklist. The first files you're going to need for Task 3 are going to be your student work samples. This is where you're going to collect all of your student work from the assessment that you gave, and this includes your focus students and your entire class. And you're going to select 3 student work samples. At least one needs to be a student with a learning need, and we'll go over that in a second. But the way that you're going to choose the student work samples is you want to make sure that they represent some kind of pattern that's going on in your class. This can be what students are still struggling to understand. This can be something that you saw that students have improved on that they couldn't do before, but you want to see some pattern of learning. And then the students that you're going to choose for this, as I said, one has to be a student with a specific learning need. This can be a student with an IEP, a 504 plan. It can be an English language learner. It can be just a struggling reader. It can be an underperforming student in general. It can be a student with specific gaps in their knowledge for your class, or it can be a gifted student who needs to be pushed farther. But you want to make sure that you have some student with a specific learning need. And then the second set of files that you're going to submit is going to be your evidence of feedback. So again, this is going to be 3 documents where you show exactly what feedback you gave to those 3 focus students. So this gets paired with your work sample, so that whatever your work sample is, you're going to show the feedback that went with that. This can be a video clip, it can be a document. You do need to submit the actual evidence of the feedback, not just a description of the feedback. So you want to make sure that you plan that during Task 2. And you are also, this is going to match up with the rubric or checklist that you are going to include for Part 4, for Part D. So you want to make sure that you're using the rubric now filled in to show students what they did well in and what they still need to improve on according to your original objective for the lessons. Next, your feedback needs to be both positive and constructive. So it's great to give positive feedback, but you also definitely need to give constructive feedback. You need to give them advice on how they can do better next time. The feedback can be displayed and edited work, so that's fine. This can be also based on feedback that they've gotten previously. And just remember that good job is not feedback. That feels good, but it's a little bit like junk food. It doesn't tell students what they did well that they should continue to do, and it also doesn't tell them how they can improve on things. You want to make sure that your feedback is based on your objectives and exactly what you wanted them to learn. And it's in the rubric, and it's part of the assessment. And then for part C of task 3, this is going to be your assessment commentary. So you want to make sure you go back and reread the pages in your handbook that tell you about what you need for this. The commentary has to be 10 pages. You really want to write up to 10 pages because if you write less than that, you're not going to give the detail that EdTPA is really looking for. You need to make sure that you do it in the template between the brackets, just like the other commentaries. And the actual assessment that you're using for task 3 needs to be a blank copy that should be at the end of your commentary. I know this can be somewhat confusing because it doesn't actually say that it should go there, but you want to include the blank assessment up to 5 pages. If it's longer than that, just choose 5 pages of it that most show that assessment. But it's going to be within your template just at the very end. And don't worry, this does not count towards your page count. And then lastly, you want to make sure that you have citations at the end. These also do not count toward the page count. Question 4B especially asks for citations, and you want to make sure that you have at least 2 of them. And these need to be well-established and trustworthy sources, right? You're not using regular websites. You want to make sure that you've used what you've learned in classes to cite real research. And you don't need to worry about the style of your citations. Any style is fine. So you can use MLA, you can use APA. That doesn't matter as long as you have the citations and their quality. Lastly, for part D, you're going to be submitting your evaluation criteria. This is going to be the blank version of the rubric or checklist that you used for your assessment. And this is the criteria that you're using to evaluate this particular assessment, to evaluate your students. You also need to have a modified rubric or checklist, and this is going to be modified for any students with special learning needs. So if you have any IEP students, they're going to have a different rubric of what they needed for this assignment, what they needed to show you, or maybe if you have ELLs. It's up to you what special learning needs you're using to modify your rubric, but you want to make sure that you have a second rubric that shows how some students had to show you differently what they could know. It also needs to include the target score. So the target score is what it means to pass the test. Is it 70%? Is it 4 out of 5 questions? What is the target score that shows that students have mastered this assessment? And you want to make sure that you have that so that you know exactly who has passed your assessment and who has not yet. And remember that this is not filled in. This needs to be a blank copy of your rubric or checklist. Just some things you want to remember. When writing your assessment commentary, everything is already complete and now you're just analyzing the data. So this is not you giving an assessment. This is about how you're analyzing how the students did so that you know what to teach next. The second thing you want to remember is make sure to respond to the prompts. You really want to make sure that you're answering the actual question they're asking. If you're repeating the same thing for every question, you're probably not reading the question closely enough. The third is that you want to look at your work against the exemplar. Remember that a level 3 is passing, a level 2 is not passing. So you want to make sure that you have exactly what's in that level 3 or the level 4 box for each of the rubrics for task 3. And then lastly, it is absolutely okay if not all of your kids did well. It's actually okay if a lot of them didn't do well. This is not a formal evaluation like we have in school. This is just to show how you can analyze how your students do and what they need next. So if you have all your students pass and do really well, you can't show that. You want to make sure that you have some students that are challenged enough that you have to give them more instruction on this. So it is absolutely okay if your students did not perform well. You want to make sure that you include that. You're absolutely free to talk about that in your commentary. It makes you seem as though you really can reflect on your students and be honest about what they need, and that you can analyze your data well. And then when you have all of the parts of your task 3 completed, make sure you read the specifications chart one more time to make sure that you've labeled them correctly, that you have the files formatted appropriately. You want to make sure that you look at all of the rubrics and just check that you have everything that those rubrics ask for. If you're not quite sure what they mean by something, you can go to the rubric progression document, and that'll tell you what you need for a 3 versus a 2, and it can be very helpful. And then finally, just make sure that you have everything complete before you turn it in. You will be turning in all of your files at once for task 3 to your instructor.